So can I get you to open a different file for me? The thing that we've been working on, you can close up. You don't need to save that anymore, or save it if you want it, but we're not going to work on it anymore. We're going to go to something that looks very familiar, though. It's going to be that same figure, but again, if you go back into session number 9, there's a folder in there called Puppet Warp, and inside that there will be a Puppet Warp figure. If you can open that file for me, that'd be great. So again, this one has got a couple of guidelines in it. I'm going to get rid of the guidelines, up to the view menu, come down to guides and clear the guides to get rid of them. There's also some janky shit that's happening on here, and I think it's on the floor. So your figure group should be open. And if you look at the bottom layer, the knockout layer, there's a layer mask on that doing the knockout, and you can see there's 2 holes in the layer mask that are letting this part of the floor still show up. So, find it? Yep, so click on the layer mask, hit the L key to get the lasso tool, circle one of them, hold down the Shift key, and circle the other one. And then if black is your foreground color, we're working on the layer mask. We want to fill those areas with black so that it hides that floor. Option delete, Command D to deselect. Finally, you want to turn off the background layer. We want to see this on a completely transparent background. And then to finish it off, you can go ahead and collapse the figure group, and we're going to turn that into a smart object. So with the figure group selected, up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects, and Convert to Smart Object. And now what I've got is a figure that I can actually work with on a transparent background. And transparent backgrounds are really important if we are going to do what's called puppet warping. Does anybody in this room ever use Puppet Warp? Okay, well, this will change things quite a bit. So Puppet Warp is somewhat related to Liquify in that it's a transforming tool. That's why you always want to do it on a smart object. You want to make sure that it's non-destructive. And to use the tool, I'm going to first zoom in just a little bit. To use the tool, it's in the Edit menu, down to Puppet Warp. You'll see it's really close to the Transform group. It's sitting right at the very top of that part. And anyway, if you click on that, it'll open up, and you won't notice anything changing except for the options bar that run along the very top. In the options bar that run along the very top, we're going to leave it at its defaults right now. I'll explain what these things are a little bit later, but first I want to show you what the tool really does. Yes? Is that grayed out?
Yeah, it's grayed out. I'm not really sure.
Do a quick restart of Photoshop. Let's look at your layers palette first. Yeah, don't collapse that yet because you want to get rid of those things on the bottom because otherwise those will puppet warp as well. So open your figure again. Here, I'm going to show you with these guys because these guys just got back. Hey guys, really quickly, if you're going to do this with us, you need to open up a quick file, and then hopefully, Xavier, you can just follow along with this, make sure you get there. So if you go to session 9, inside of session 9 is a folder called Puppet Warp. Inside of that, there are 2 files. You want to open the one called Puppet Warp Figure. You got that open? You're good? Okay. First thing, it's got guidelines on it. I want to get rid of those. Come up to the View menu, down to Guides, over to Clear Guides. Then if you take a look inside the figure group, so go ahead and open up the figure group in the Layers palette, and scroll down to the bottom where you'll see the girl on green screen. There's a mistake in that mask that's on that green screen knockout. That's why you see those bits of floor that are on left and right, right next to her. Click on the layer mask, hit the L key to get the lasso tool and circle the one on the right. Hold down your Shift key and circle the one on the left. And then with that layer mask selected, you need to fill that with black. Black is my foreground color, so Option Delete. Command D to deselect. So did you get rid of the parts on the floor? Are we good? Are you good, Mar? You don't have the things on the floor?
No, my floor is completely like.
Oh, okay, good. Then it doesn't matter. Then collapse the figure group. Make sure that everything else is turned off, including the background. And then convert the group to a smart object. Up to Layer, down to Smart Object, down to Convert to Smart Object. And you should have a smart object of that girl on a transparent background. Did that work for you? Yeah. Do you have Puppet Warp available now? Yeah. It's a restart. Are you good? Okay. So Puppet Warp. So up to Puppet Warp again. It's a transform. It's different than Liquify, but it has a role. And I just noticed this when I was looking at Xavier's desktop. This image right here, this is a Marc Jacobs image. It's a Marc Jacobs advertisement. It was actually shot by Jürgen Teller. What can you guys tell me about this image?
It's kind of hot.
Kind of hot. Anything? Yeah, it's pixelated. It's all that. I'm really talking more about the subject matter or the subject itself. She's 12 feet tall. Yeah. Every single fashion picture that you have seen in the last decade at least, if not the last 2 decades, whatever, people have been stretched taller. It's got nothing to do with, it's just simply how it is. It's just a standard in the industry. It happens. Trying to do that with Liquify is a nightmare. Trying to do it with a regular transform scale is also a nightmare, because if you do it with a transform scale, you can scale people taller, but their faces become taller, their fingers become taller. I mean, everything gets stretched out, together, and that's not even remotely believable. Not that this is believable, but I just wanted to show you sort of as an extreme example. So the solution to doing that is Puppet Warp, and so that's what we're going to work with right now. However, to say that it only is used to make people taller would be a gross misrepresentation of the power of this tool. It's amazing what you can actually do with it. So, to start, it is a transform. You want to make sure that you are only working on a smart object, because That allows you to go in and refine the transform. It allows you to undo the transform. It allows you to do, it's completely non-destructive. So you want to make sure that you are working on a smart object. To get to it, you come up to the edit menu and it's down in the transform group. You'll notice it's just above the free transform, so it's called Puppet Warp. You want to click on that. And it doesn't look like much has changed. In some of your cases, you might see it looks like a spider web on the girl. Do you guys have the spider web part? If you don't have this, so the spiderweb part is, if you look up in your options menu up at the very top, you'll see that there's a thing that says show mesh. You can uncheck this or check it. It doesn't have any impact on how the tool works. It's just a visualization aid for you. So this is the way that you need to think about how Puppet Warp actually works. The way I always think about it is that imagine that this is a spider web that has completely enveloped this girl. And pretty much like a spider web, if you touch any one part of the spider web, it moves the entire spider web. That's how spiders know that shit has flown into it. There's signals that are sent to it. So all of these lines are all interconnected. So I can pin part of this spider web down so that it doesn't move, and then use other parts of it that are not pinned down to actually move in relationship to those. So this is what this basically means. If you've got the mesh on, go ahead and turn it off for a second because you don't really need it right now. And we're just going to sort of like ease into this. What I want you to do is I want to be able to see basically this much of the girl. So you can see sort of I've got her cropped a little bit above the knees and a little bit below the top of her head because I'm going to do primarily start work right here on this left arm. And what I want you to do is come over and I want you to take your cursor and I want you to click right about where you think the joint in her wrist of that hand is. And if you click once, you'll see that it actually puts down a little circle, white circle with a little blue dot in the middle of it. That has actually now been pinned down. That's what they are actually referring to this as. And you'll see where the pin metaphor comes in just a minute. Then I want you to actually come over and we're going to do another pin on the other wrist in about the same spot. So I'm going to just click on the other wrist. And you'll notice what happens now is that the pin that I just added to the right wrist has got the blue dot in it, and the one that's on the original one that I put down on the left wrist is just white. What that tells you is that you can move the one that's got the blue in it, but the one that's got the white in it will not move at all. So click on the blue dot and simply drag up, and you will see you can rotate this girl completely around that other wrist. You will also notice that all of her moves because the spider web that is enveloping her is going with it. It's dragging everything with it. However, the initial pin that we put down is not moving at all. It's actually frozen in place. Does this make sense to everybody, sort of what's going on? Good on that part? Okay. If you take a look up at the options bar that sits up at the very top, on the far right-hand side, you will see that there is an icon that looks like an arrow that's going counterclockwise. There is a circle, the line through it, and then there's a check mark. If you click on the first of the most left, the one that's got the counterclockwise arrow going to it's going counterclockwise, if you click on that, it removes all your pins and the girl goes right back to the way she was. But we are still in Puppet Warp, and you know that because you can look at the options bar and you can still see there's the show mesh, there's other things that are actually going on in here. That part is actually happening. So that in and of itself doesn't do us a whole lot of good. However, what does do us a lot of good is going to be this. So I've reset, I've gotten rid of all those pins. If you had clicked on this circle with the slash through it, it will simply take you out of Puppet Warp back into Photoshop and no Puppet Warping will happen. If you click on the check mark, it will actually apply the Puppet Warp and it will bring you back into Photoshop and your image will be Puppet Warped. It will be changed. So we're going to do something a little bit more with this. Instead, I'm going to start off, same arm on the left-hand side. I'm going to click and put a pin right about where I think her elbow joint should actually be. Then I'm going to come down to her wrist, and I'm going to put another pinpoint right at her wrist where we were in the very beginning. So now you would think that, okay, the same thing is going to happen. If I click on this and rotate it, her whole body spins around that pin at her elbow. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Command Z does work in the puppet warp space. But now what I'm going to do, instead of letting the rest of her body rotate, is I'm going to pin the rest of her body down. So I'm going to click at her upper shoulder on the left-hand side. I'm going to click once to put a pin right there. I'm going to hold down the space bar to temporarily get the hand so that I can move it and see her head. I'm going to put another pin right in the middle of her forehead. I'm going to put a pin on the other shoulder, her left shoulder. And now you would think, okay, well, her body's pinned down pretty well right now. I should be able to move this. But look what happens if you click on that wrist again. So again, I'm clicking on the pin to make the pin at the wrist with the little blue dot in it. If I click and move this now, you'll see that yes, the upper part of her body is pinned. So her shoulders are not moving, her her head is not moving, but you can see that the rest of her body is still being impacted by this. Her legs are still moving, her other arm is still moving. And the reason that is happening is that again, the entire spider web is enveloping her body. And there are parts of it that you have frozen, but that doesn't freeze everything. If you want everything frozen, you need to pin it. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that to bring us back. I'm going to put another pin right at her waist in sort of the middle of it, another pin at her knees, another pin at the lower part like where her ankle is, and finally another pin on her other wrist. Now when I come back to the original wrist, the one on the left, and click it once to make sure that the little blue dot shows, now I can actually drag this in and you see that the rest of her body is frozen in place. I want you to bring that arm all the way to the point where you'll actually see it goes behind the skirt. It looks like she's scratching her butt. Is that working for everybody? Who is not with me? Are we good on this part? Okay. If you zoom in, you can now see the problem that I've got with this is that it's actually made her arm look like it's curving. It doesn't look like it's actually bending. You need more pins to do that in order to actually take some of that out. I'm okay with the upper part of her body, but the lower part, I'm going to click a point right between the pin at her elbow and the one at her wrist. I'm going to click right there to set another pin down. Now her elbow and her wrist are frozen. They do not have a little blue dot in there. I'm going to click on the blue pin in the middle and I'm going to push that towards her body to square up that arm a little bit so that it looks a little bit more believable. And now it looks like there is a bend in her wrist as opposed to her wrist being a tube-shaped thing. You'll also notice that this again, the hand is behind her skirt. Is the hand behind everybody's skirt on this one? Yep. Okay. However, you'll notice that there's a space between her hand and the skirt. There's a blank space there. You don't see anything. That has to do with this expansion right here. If you turn on the show mesh, you will see that the mesh actually goes slightly outside of the body all the way around it. And that's critical for us because if the mesh didn't completely envelop the body, it would leave bits and pieces of this image behind, which you do not want to have happen. You want it to be completely enclosed. And that's what's going on here. That's why you see this space. However, if we accept this transform, to do that, click on the check mark up at the top. You will actually see that that space no longer exists. And now what we have just done is we have moved her hand so that it is behind her skirt. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that's pretty insane. I'm not done. I'm going to double click on, again, you'll see it's a smart filter. I'm going to double click on it again to open it up, and you'll see it'll take us right back into that space. And then I want this to be on the top of her skirt, not the bottom. Now the reason it's gone behind her is that it all has to do with pin order. So since we started with the pin that is at her wrist, it is going to be the backmost part. When we got to the pinning of her skirt, her waist and her knees, those were later in the game. So those pins in this dimensional world are on top of the pin that we set first, which was her wrist. To change the pin order, select the pin that is her wrist, and you'll see up in your options palette, there is two icons called pin depth. One of them, the closest one to the word pin depth, has got a stack with an arrow pointing up. The one to the right of it is a stack with an arrow pointing down. This just controls where the pin happens relative to all the others. If you click on the one closest to pin depth, you will notice that her hand comes right in front of the skirt because we have now brought it up in the pin depth level. And now if you say OK, you can see that it actually doesn't keep that expansion transparent area around it. It simply brought this into the front of her skirt right now.
Will that change how it wraps around her body? Like the spider web?
No, the spider web is still the spider web. So again, you can double click on Puppet Warp. You can show the mesh again. So the mesh is controlling all of this. So if you wanted to put it back again, click on that same wrist point, and then click the pin depth, the second of the pin depth icons to push it down in space. Sometimes you'll have to click on it more than once depending on how many pins you've ultimately got in here. So it allows you to do these kinds of things. And why does that matter to you? Well, let me ask you this. So everybody look at me. You won't see this on the video, but you will hear it. So one of the biggest problems that we have in doing compositing that's believable is, let's say this is our scene. We're going to strip Verser into this scene right here. And so, plunk, you put me into this scene. And I'm just floating here. If you get the shadows right, if you get the lighting right, if you do all of that kind of stuff, whatever, you'll get some believability to it, right? But if you really, truly want to anchor me into this space, you take something from the scene and you put it in front of me, like this. I am anchored into this scene right now because I've got background element that's in the scene that's actually covering me. Does that make sense? And this works for all sorts of things. You put a car onto a lawn, put some of the grass up on front of the tires, the way it would really be. Because then you're taking elements that are, you're not just stacking, you're not just dropping a figure in there on the top layer. You're actually then taking elements of the background that belong to the background and bringing them on top of this, right? So you've shot me like this, and you put me into this scene like this, and I don't look believable here at all, but you puppet warp my arm up like this, and all of a sudden, I'm in the scene. Make sense? All right. A couple of other things we need to talk about with Puppet Warp, just so that you guys know. We're going to change the density of the mesh. So it's a thing up at the very top. I'm going to zip back out just a little bit so we can see a little bit more of it. But it's the second of the sort of options in the options toolbar open available to us. If you click on this drop down, you'll see you can do fewer points. And if you click on the fewer points, you will notice that our mesh, the spider web, has fewer intersections and fewer segments. You use this if you are working on a computer that's not very powerful. Again, it doesn't take as much processing power because it's far fewer points that it has to calculate. But you'll also notice that my image just changed when I did that. If I go back to normal, you'll see that the figure changes again. I've got more points. It's a way to be more nuanced about it, but it takes more processing power to actually do this. And then finally, if you go to more points, you'll see that the mesh gets really fine, and you can do really fine adjustment and control here. I personally only work with more points. You have much more control, but it takes process power. So if you go in here and you're trying to puppet warp something, and all of a sudden it's 15 minutes rendering time before it'll actually happen, you're using too many points. But other than that, you want to start out using more points. The problem is that that's not the default. And the second problem is, once you've got a whole lot of points on here, if you change your density, it will completely change the puppet warping that you're doing. You can see it happening right here. When I go to change any of these, it just changes, my whole image just moved. So you want to start with more points if you have the computer that'll do it. You want to use normal. If you don't, you want to avoid fewer points if you possibly can. Is this making sense to everyone? All right, I'm going to leave this on more points here because there's something that's, you'll see it's going to show up. But I am going to do uncheck show mesh. We're going to move up to the top. So one of the great things about making people taller is stretching necks. It's an extremely difficult thing to do. A lot of people used to have to do it using, they would cut and paste multiple parts of heads. They would actually then stretch out a neck only. They would add the neck to it, and then they would try to blend the two back in together, whatever. It's an absolute nightmare to try to do it. So you can see if we come over here, there is a point that's right in the middle of her forehead. If I click on that point in the middle of her forehead and make it active, and drag straight up, you see that it indeed makes everything longer. It stretches out her face, it stretches out the neck, it stretches out her shoulders a little bit. This is not what we actually want to do. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. To stretch out her neck, you need to actually pin everything that you want in here and not pin the stuff that you actually want to move. However, this pin is in the middle of her forehead. I don't really want it there. So I'm going to start with it. I'm going to get rid of it first to actually then place pins in a different spot. If you hover your cursor over that pin and hold down the Option key, you will see that you actually get a circle that goes around it. If at this stage of the game you don't do anything, but you just move your cursor to the side, you will get a double-headed arrow. And now if you click and drag as if it's a clock, you can actually rotate around that point. If, on the other hand, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, you hover over the same point, hold down the Option key, click, and do not move your cursor away from it. You get a pair of scissors, which kills that point. You cannot move points in Puppet Warp. You can only get rid of them and add new ones. You cannot drag a point because what it does is it'll actually do a Puppet Warp instead. Now, a lot of people say, well, the rotate thing doesn't mean anything. However, if you come down to her wrist one and click on the wrist one, hold down the Option key, get the little circle part, click and, hold down the Option key, get the circle part, drag your cursor away without dragging, you get the double-headed arrow part. You can actually bend her wrist. So again, much better, much finer control, perfect. But back to her forehead, how do we stretch the neck? So this is how you do it. We need to freeze basically her shoulders and the base of her neck. So I'm just going to start laying points all the way across this. I'm then going to do points that are just on her face. So I'm going to start one on her chin, and then I'm going to work my way up the side of her face. And the reason I'm doing this is that unless I have all of these points selected, it will warp in between the points. So I might be able to raise her head. Well, here, you can see. We'll just do one. I'm going to do the other side. I'm going to sort of give her like a chin strap. So we'll leave it just at this part right here. So to actually then lift her head, we need to select multiple points. I need to select all the ones that are forming that line underneath her chin. To do that, you hold down the Shift key and you click on the other points, and you'll see they all end up with little blue dots. And now it doesn't matter which one I select, they will all move at the same time. I'm going to do the one that's right at her chin. I'm going to click and drag straight up. And you see it does a fairly good job of that, but look what it just did to her mouth. It distorted her mouth because, again, that part of the mesh is connected to the whole rest of her body. And I have not frozen any of that part into place. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that part. We need to add a whole another set of pins. So you need to do the entire top of her head.
Can you not Command Z twice?
Do what?
Can you not Command Z twice?
Oh yeah, if it's Command Option Z to go back more than once. You also need to pin that little curl that's out on the outside left of her. You need a pin in both of her eyes. You need a pin at her nose. You need a pin in the middle of her mouth. And you need pins across her forehead. Now take a look at this. I want you to actually come really close. It doesn't matter what pin you've just laid down. I want you to come really close to a pin and click to add another one down. And you will get this warning dialog box that jumps up and it says you can't add a pin here because it is too close to an existing pin. If you need to do that, you need to increase the density of your mesh. Well, I'm already at more points. This is why you want to start with more points. It's because you don't want to get into the situation where you go, oh fuck, I need to actually change it from normal to more points to actually do this, and then all of the work that you have already done in Puppet Warp is changed because you've changed the shape of your mesh. Does this make sense, everyone? Okay, and then hold down your Shift key and select all of those other points. So again, they all go blue now. All the ones that surround her entire head, the ones that are across her forehead, the ones that are on her eyes, the ones that are on her nose, her lips, all of this, they all get selected. Unfortunately, there's no way to click and drag. I wish there were. That doesn't work here. Note to Photoshop. So now with all of the ones on her head selected, but her neck not, now I'm just going to click on the one in the middle of her nose and drag up. And you can see I have now stretched nothing but her neck, and I have not distorted her head in the least.
When I go to, like as I'm clicking shift,
Yeah.
it's jarring her face, like if that makes sense.
No.
I think I also made that too. So like, this is the end result. But as I was clicking, like I was shift clicking,
Yeah.
it was like compressing her face, if that makes sense. Like every time I would
Yeah, well, again, it's probably not a good idea to do it with a pin, because if you drag your pin at all, you're actually moving the pin. But if again, this is going to get rid of all of your pins, which you don't necessarily want to do. But if we click on just a single pin, it'll get rid of everybody else. Actually, I don't know why all of these are black. When you set down a new pin, is it black? No, it's white.
The white is your blue.
Oh, okay. Wait, the white is my blue and the black is, no, because I just put down a regular pin.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you need to make all of these white. So again, you're just clicking through here and not moving at all. Okay? But you'll get where this is going.
Yeah, I got you. I just want to make sure.
Okay. So at any rate, I've actually now lifted this up a little bit. Unfortunately, there is no preview in here we can use. So you would just have to simply say OK to this. Again, do your check mark to say OK. And then go back in here. And remember now, this is a smart filter has done this. If you click on the layer mask of the smart filter and hit Command I, you invert it, you fill it with black. And this will do your before and after. And you can see it is a beautiful, convincing stretching of this girl's neck. It's insane. Make sense? I'm going to go back into Puppet Warp one last time. I'm going to actually now make her taller. So I'm going to zip back out. To make her taller, again, I've got her upper body that's actually pinned. I'm going to add another pin at the top of her waist on both sides. I'm going to move in here just a little bit. So I've got 3 that are running across her waist. I'm also going to do the bottom of her skirt. I've got 3 that are running across that. I'm even going to do a 4th one at the very end of it. So both knees and the rest of it. And then I'm going to leave the pins that are sitting on the bottom underneath the ones that are on her shoes right now. So I'm going to select the pins now that are running across the bottom of her skirt. So I've selected the first one, hold down the Shift key, the second one, Shift key, third one, Shift key, fourth one. And now I can click and actually drag any one of those down to make her thighs longer. But look what happens. When I make her thighs longer, it makes her shins shorter because, again, I've got a pin down at the bottom that's not moving. Command Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to add another pin at her toe and another pin at the back of her heel. And now I'm going to select all. So now I'm going to actually select all of those. So the pins, again, using the Shift key across the bottom of her skirt. the ones that are actually on her shoes as well. So now when I push this down, everything goes with it. Her shins don't change, and I just make her thighs a little bit longer. Don't go in there making her thighs like 15 feet longer, just a little bit. And then finally, to stretch out her legs just a little bit more, I'm going to click outside, or I'm going to click on, put in a different pin somewhere, it doesn't matter where, just so that I get everybody unselected. And then I'm going to click on the ones that are her feet only. So shift key to select the shoes only. And then again, I'm going to click and just simply pull down to make her shins slightly longer. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK to that, check mark to that to actually submit it. I'm going to double click on the hand. And now you can actually invert the Smart Object Mask, and you can actually see what we've actually done in here. So personally, I think that we've stretched out her legs a little bit too much, but that's the beauty of using Puppet Warp as a smart object. You can double click on it and go right back in, and I'm going to select the lower part of her and her shoes. And I'm going to lift this back up a little bit so that it's not quite stretched out so much, because that looks a little bit ridiculous. And say OK to that. And now invert my layer mask. Much better. Are there questions about this? Okay, one thing that you should know about this, and it's the thing that people run into all the time, the problem that people run into all the time. I'm going to throw this whole Puppet Warp part away. So I just threw the whole Smart filter away. It gets rid of all of it. I'm going to turn on the background, and I'm then going to select everything. I've got the top one, the top figure selected. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select the bottom one, and I'm going to turn that all into a smart object. So up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects, and convert to Smart Object. And it gives me basically just a single layer of this girl on white now. She's not on transparency, she's on white. And now do your Puppet Warp. Come in, Puppet Warp. Go ahead and turn on Show Mesh. You're fucked. It's the whole thing. I can't bend her arm. It's all connected to the background. Everything here warps. Try it again. Put one pin right there at her wrist. Put a pin on the other side, and then try to move that. It moves the entire image.
That's kind of interesting.
It may be interesting, but it won't do anything. Again, try to do any of the stuff that we did. Put another pin and try to bend her elbow. So here, go ahead and pin the rest of her. It simply doesn't work. I mean, look at this. That's what it does, because it's connected to the background. So how lucky are you that you know how to knock shit out? Oh, really lucky, because now I can make this tool work for me. Questions? Okay. So we're at a point that you get to make a decision, because I'm feeling everybody has hit a wall. We have options. I'm not letting you go. That's a waste of time. It's a waste of your money and my time. I'm not going to do that. But you have a choice. There's two things that I want to get done in this class that I could probably get done, but I feel like I would be jamming through it and you guys would probably lose most of it. So we have an option here. We can do one of two things. We can do highly complex shadows for compositing, or we can do recoloring fabric, or recoloring really anything. So what do I mean by recoloring anything? Can I take this shirt that I'm wearing and make it white? Could you do that? Yes? Sorry? You think you can take this shirt and make it white? Oh, I can't. Right. So that's the challenge. So complex shadows or recoloring? So here. Okay, wait a second. So all those in favor of complex shadows? 1, 2, 3. Don't worry, we'll get to complex shadows next week if we don't do it this week. So it's not, this isn't an either or. This is like, where's your brain at? Are you into dealing with color or shadows?
Like in the whole class. I was like,
What?
I thought you meant like for the rest of the class.
Oh, no.
learn together.
No, not one or the other, not one or the other. So, okay, so back again. Complex shadows, no one. Recoloring fabric, everyone. Okay. I think you made the right choice. The complex shadow thing is one of those, it's just like, God, shoot me now. But it's where we're going to start next week. No, it's where we're going to start next week, so you're not going to lose it. You're not going to be able to use it for your composites that you've done, that you're going to do for your homework for next week, but most of you guys aren't going to be doing situations that would call for that anyway. Okay, so we are going to do recoloring fabric. I think you made the right call. You can close Puppet Warp Image up. You do not need to save this. So one of the advantages of recoloring fabric, we can actually go down to session 10 now. This will be in your session 10 folders. And inside this, you will see there is a number of files that are called Shirt. One is Shirt Dark version 2. If you could open that one up for me, that would be great. And the reason I want to use this one is I've already built some layer masks in here and some selections in here, so it'll actually be an easier place to start with. So we're not only going to recolor this and make this a white shirt, we're going to actually make it an infinite number of colors. So that's the process that we're going to actually go through in doing this. So I don't know anybody who does this work the way that I actually do it, although I learned this actually from a really obscure Photoshop cookbook in like 1990. I mean, this goes way, 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 way back. It is a recipe, and that's all I can tell you. You need to follow the recipe. I have given you the recipe for recoloring light and dark objects. There's two different ways to do it. We're going to do both. We're going to do a light one and then a dark one. That's what we're going to do right now, and a light one. But I beg you to save this PDF, because this PDF will make you a fortune if you actually really get into this stuff. And it's this thing right here, recoloring fabric. So if we double click on this, this is the original recipe that was in that book with additions that I've actually put into this. So this will walk you through all the steps of this exact example that we've actually got. So I'm going to walk you through this stuff. I may come back and refer to this every now and then. I've got a copy of it right here in my book. Because again, this is not the kind of thing that I do every single day, but it is the kind of stuff that I actually, when it comes time to do it, when people see what you do out of this and see the results that you can actually come up with in this, they're absolutely stunned and amazed. So let me get to my recoloring part really quickly. Okay. So, starting with our layer mask part, with our black shirt that's actually opened right here. Again, I'm going to take a look at mine really quickly. First things first, and this is critical. If you don't do this, your stuff is not going to look anywhere near as believable. Your first move on this is that you've got to change the mode that we're working in of this image. So right now, this is an RGB image. You can see it says RGB right here. If you actually collapse your history panel slightly, and you take a look at your RGB channels, you've got a red channel, you've got the composite RGB, not a real channel, but nonetheless. You've got a red channel, a green channel, a blue channel, then you've actually got some alpha channels down here that are selections for all part of this. Our first move in this is to change this to an LAB mode instead of RGB. You'll notice that there's also an RGB in the title right up here. To change this to LAB, come up to the image menu, down to mode, down to LAB color. This is absolutely critical. If you don't do this, the problem that you run into is when we go to change coloring in here, you end up with, again, it's the problem that we have always in RGB and working with curves. Whenever you change the color, you are also changing the tone. So if I put a curve on here, I'll do it really quickly here. I'm going to change back to RGB. If I put a curve on here, and I go to my red channel, and I just say the red channel, and I click and I pull it down, it removes red, it puts in a lot of cyan, but it also makes all of those red pixels darker. I'm actually pulling this down. It's not changing just color, it's changing color and tone. So then you say to me, because you're smart, well, Verser just changed that so it only impacts color blending mode. And I can say, yeah, that's true, but this is an emulation of LAB. And you are just better off, instead of doing an emulation of LAB, just doing it in LAB. So that's what I'm going to do. Back up to here, up to the image menu, down to mode, down to LAB. Your success, people only do this kind of color correction in LAB. So, and there are other reasons that you're going to see why to do that even more so in just a second. Okay, so we've got this into LAB right now. I've got those guys, come on. Okay, so I'm going to simply create a group, just a blank group. So come over to your layers palette, click on the little icon that looks like a folder down at the bottom, and it adds just a blank group up on top of this. Again, I'm just following my recipe here. We are going to go look at our channels, and you will see that there is a shirt mask channel that's sitting here. It's actually called shirt. If you hold down your command key and click, just hover over the icon of the channel that says shirt and click on it, it will load it as a layer mask, and then come over here to your group and add it as a layer mask. It's really now a group mask. So anything that is inside this group will be masked like this mask is. And you can see what's being protected in here is the background and the labels and the buttons. They're not going to change color. But the fabric itself will be changing color because, again, the fabric is white, everything else is black. Does that make sense to everyone here, what's going on? Jack? There's nothing in the group yet. I've just added a layer mask to the group. So here, I'll show you really quick. I'm going to get rid of that layer mask. So do you have just a blank group above it? Yep. So come over to your channels palette, hover over the channel that says shirt, hold down the command key and click to load it as a selection, and then just back on your group, and then just add layer mask. It just adds a layer mask to the entire group. Then you've already got one other layer mask on there. It looks like, it sounds like you're adding a vector mask as well. First off, you've got a layer in there. Get rid of the layer.
I'm so stupid. I just hit the wrong button.
That's okay. That's all right. Don't worry about it. Just throw the whole layer away. You don't need that guy. It's just the group. Perfect. You're good. Hey, it's a long day. I know that. I realize all of that. All apologies. Okay. So we're going to make a copy of the background. So click on the background. Again, we always keep a virgin here. Command J will actually make a copy of it. And you can drag this on top of the group. You'll see the group gets a little blue box that goes around it, and let go. This is now inside the group. You'll notice that it just popped over slightly to the right. It's actually inside of the group. And anything that I do to this guy right now will actually be impacted by the mask. So the mask is, again, allowing us only to change the fabric. We don't want to recolor the background or the buttons or the labels or any of that stuff. So our next move is to desaturate this. And the reason we want to do this, and this is critical when you guys are doing really extreme color correction, you want to get rid of any color that exists. You want to start with a blank slate. You do not want to have some cyan shirt in here that you're trying to create to be a white shirt, whatever, because you're going to have to fight that color and all that. So the easiest thing to do is just to desaturate it. It removes all of the color, and it leaves nothing but the texture behind. To do that, come up to the image menu. Now, you don't want to use an adjustment layer to this. You actually want to do this to that layer. Up to the image menu, down to adjustments, down to desaturate. Now, you won't notice much change because it was basically a black shirt and it had no color in it, but nonetheless, it's a move that's important to do. You also want to double click on that name, and you want to call this DSAT1. I know. It's okay. We need to make 2 more copies of DSAT1. So we've actually got DSAT1. It's in the group. I'm going to hit Command J again and change that DSAT1 copy to DSAT2. and then Command J again, and change that dsat copy 2 to dsat 3. You want to turn off the eyeballs for dsat 1 and 2, and you want to activate dsat 1. So I've got dsat 1 is active, the eyeball is on. dsat 2 and 3 are both eyeballs are turned off. We now need to add a solid color adjustment layer on top of dsat 1. So the little icon at the bottom of your layers palette, the circle, half black, half white, click on that, come up, and we are going to add a solid color. In the solid color, I'm going to click on the RGB. Even though this is in an LAB mode, I'm going to do my values here in RGB because those are what we have been working with, what you actually might understand. And I'm going to type in 245 for the red, 245 for the green, and 245 for the blue. It's a very light gray is what we're doing. And click OK. So now we've actually got the shirts white, but it actually has, it's just an outline. It's blank. It has absolutely zero detail here in it at all. You need to change the blending mode of this solid color adjustment layer you added from normal down to hard light. Now at this stage of the game, we've picked up a little bit of contrast and a little bit of contouring in here, but it's not enough to really tell that this is a white shirt. Again, you can see, finally I can see a little bit of the collar and a little bit of the cuffs, but not really that much. This is where dsat 2 and 3 come in. Click on dsat 2's eyeball to make it act, to turn it on, make it visible. Click on the layer itself, and you need to change the blending mode from normal to overlay. Remember, overlay is a contrast move. And now we've started to bring contrast back into this guy. So this is getting me closer to it, but it's not quite there. So I'm going to hit it one more time. That's what dsat 3 is all about. Turn on dsat 3, make it active, and also change its blending mode from normal down to overlay. We're pumping in more contrast now, but look at what we've got going on right here. This is now, I would call this a light gray shirt. I wouldn't necessarily call this a white shirt. Now, dsat 3 may be a little extreme in the amount of contrast we've brought into here, but I'm thinking we really just need to boost the white of the solid color adjustment layer that we started with. I like the contrast on here. If you felt like it was just a minor adjustment, you could drop the opacity of your dsat 3 down a little bit, which lowers the contrast or the impact of that overlay layer a little bit, brightens it up a little bit, but I still think the problem with this is that it's the original solid color layer. So I'm going to go back down to my original solid color layer. I'm going to double click on this to open it up, and I'm going to change my RGB values to 250s. So 250 for the red, 250 for the green, 250 for the blue, and say OK to that. And then I'm going to go back up to my dsat 3 and crank the opacity all the way back up again. This to me strikes me as more of a white t-shirt, or a white shirt. Did this work for you guys? Okay, so Verser, tell me, what are your retouching skills like? Okay, well, let me show you. I'm going to do a color snapshot of this, and I'm going to call it white. And I'm going to say, well, in the course, and then I'm going to go all the way up to the top of my history panel. I'm going to say, well, in the course of about 10 minutes, I can do this to this. What can you do? Oh, you're a clone stamp tool person. Loser. What do you mean, loser? Clone stamp tool's gotten me out of everything I've ever done. It's made me a fortune in retouching. Yeah, $9 an hour doing hack beauty work. Are you kidding me? Anthony.
So since we're trying to get, I just want to double check. Since we made something that was another color into white, if that's a white shirt, we can technically make it any color, just off.
Oh, hang on. We're getting there.
Okay.
All right, all right. Is everybody good on this part? I'm sorry. I want every one of you guys today. Is today Tuesday? It's not really, well, but it's also election day, so maybe it's a drinking day. Take all of your friends out to the bar tonight with a laptop and say, I bet you I can do this and I bet you can't. And they're going to go in there with a hue saturation curve and try to do all that kind of shit, and it is going to look horrible, and then you whip this out on them. But you should make a bet somehow. Somehow, okay, whoever does the best one, drinks are free to them all night. Yeah, okay. If you don't drink, you could do it with drugs. If you do drink and do drugs, you could do both. If you don't do either of those, I admire you for your fortitude. I don't want to play or party with you, but I admire you. Okay, so Verser, can't we take this further? Yes, we can. So I want you to actually click on the group number 1 name, and we're just going to actually name this white, and then collapse the group. Now, we can make a duplicate of the group doing the very same thing. So to make a duplicate of the group, simply hit Command-J, and it will make a copy of it, and you'll see this thing is called white copy. We need to open this up again, and we need to talk about color, because we're going to now color this shirt. And this is the thing about color. When you actually get, how many of you have ever heard of Pantone? So can you tell me what it is? So Pantone they're like the Bible. They're the color people of the world. They actually establish color, and they have color charts, they have swatch charts, they have all sorts of things. They cost an absolute fortune. Their swatch charts are $200, $300 a pop. Oh, wait, and there's sets of them. So to get a full Pantone set of every single color swatch they have, whatever, it could be thousands of dollars. I mean, it's incredible. And and every year you have to redo it because they're printed and the inks actually change over a period of time, so nobody trusts their Pantone book that's more than a year old. It's an insidious thing. But at any rate, if you are a photographer, retoucher, working whatever, that's what you're going to get. They're going to give you a Pantone color. They're going to say, I need you to create a shirt that is a C289. Now, I have no idea what that color is, but we're going to find out right now. All right? So you're going to get the value as a Pantone color. It's up to you then to translate that into something that actually works in Photoshop, and that's what we're going to do next. Make sense? Okay. So to do it, we've actually just copied this white copy right here. Inside of it, we've got all the same colors. We're going to go to that solid color adjustment layer again, and we're going to double click on it to open it up. And when we open this up, you'll actually see it's just like the main color picker is. However, there's a thing in this dialog box that says color libraries. You need to click on color libraries. And when you click on color libraries, you'll actually see there is a drop-down menu, and these are all the color libraries that are used all over the world. So, for instance, I don't know where ANPA color comes from. I do know that full cone is what they use in Europe and Asia both. What we use here in the United States are Pantone, but these are all press books of color. In our case, in the US, you would work with Pantone, but you'll notice here, this is just what I told you, there's different sets of Pantone color charts. So, the first one up here is Pantone plus CMY coated. What this means is, what does this color look like on a coated stock? You can think of this as a paper that's got a fixative on it, or a glossy paper. That would be considered a coated stock. There's also an uncoated stock version of this. These two are different colors, even though the numbers will be the same. So you need to know when they give you a color, is this a coated color or is this an uncoated color? Usually they will give it to you in the name of the color. So they will give you a U289. That stands for uncoated 289. And I get this shit from art directors all the time. It's a C386. That's the color that shirt's supposed to be, or that's the color that rug is supposed to be, or that chair is supposed to be, or that car is supposed to be. So you need to know which one it is. So I'm going to go to the to the coated stock. It's the one that's most commonly given to people who shoot fashion. So I'm going to click on this, and you'll see there is an entire tree of colors here. If you actually click on one, I've just clicked on one right here in the middle, you can see that this is a Pantone P72-7C. Oh my God. So anyway, that's what it is. If you need to get to the exact same color that I've actually got right here, I'm going to try this really quickly. I'm going to write this down really quick. This is a really good time to have a piece of paper and a pencil. I take that back. I'm not, this is the Pantone Plus CMYK coated. I'm just going to do the solid coated. So ignore the CMYK version of it. We're going to come down to the solid coated, and I'm going to go after kind of that same area of color right there. It was a little bit lighter in here. So you can see in here, this is now a Pantone 224C. So that's the color that I'm going to actually make this shirt, 224C. For you guys to find it, do this. I'm going to select a completely different color. Simply type in 224 really quickly, and it'll take you right to that 224C, so you do not need to scroll through this thing. So when they give you that color, they'll say, okay, I need that shirt to be a 224C. You simply come in here, type 224C really, you don't need the C, 224 really quickly, and it will give you this. Make sense? But look what it has right next to it. This is another reason we work and do color correction. It has LAB coordinates. You need to write them down. So LAB, again, it's a small a and a small b. The L is a 65. The B is a 56. And the the A is a 56, and the B is a minus 16. That minus matters. In our typical RGB world, we have a scale of 256 possibilities. If it's grayscale, black is 0, white is 255. That's 256 possibilities. What Pantone does, what LAB does is that the A channel and the B channel treat 0 as neutral, and then you go 128 positive numbers in one direction and a negative 127 in the other direction, and that represents your range of color on the A axis, and the same thing on the B axis. So these negative numbers matter. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, so we're simply going to then say, okay, I'm going to pick this color and say okay to that. Now you'll notice that that doesn't look anything like this shirt at all. That's fine. I'm going to turn off those two layers that are actually adding contrast to this. You'll see that in some of these cases when we get into the midtones right here, you don't need those DSAT 2 and 3 set at overlay to actually give you the color that you're actually looking for. However, this is going to be somewhat close, but this is not an exact color because, again, we're using blending mode trick to actually make this happen. So to get this finely tricked out to make it the exact color that they wanted, we need to put a color sampler tool right in the middle. So I'm going to grab, the eyedropper that lets you put down a sampler tool. And I'm going to drop it right here in the middle of the shirt. You want to avoid any highlights on here. You want to avoid any shadows. You're looking for a general area of the shirt that should be that color. Say what? Oh, turn off the DSAT 2 and DSAT 3 layers. Turn off the contrast layers that are actually adding contrast. This will actually give you the readouts right here. And you can see in my point number 1 right here, it is in LAB. If yours is not reading in LAB, click on the little drop-down menu from the eyedropper and say that you want this to be in the actual color or LAB color, either one. It's the same thing because this is an LAB file now. And we need to look at the values that we've got here, and you can see the values that I've got here compared to the values that I wrote down from the Pantone color swatch. And the values that I wrote down were 65 for the L channel. That's the lightness, that's the luminosity of this channel. That's usually the culprit that's off the most. So we are going to simply add a curve to this. So we're going to add an adjustment curve right above this. You'll notice now that in your properties panel, the curve is no longer RGB, it is LAB. Again, you've got a lightness channel, is the L channel, the A channel, and the B channel. Lightness is the luminosity of the image. The B channel is the blue to yellow axis. The A channel is the magenta to green axis. So we're going to start with the lightness first. So click on the lightness channel. grab the targeting adjustment tool, the little hand that's got arrows pointing up and down, come over to this point and click right on that point, and then we're going to start to push up. And I'm reading the after readout right here, and I need to get these numbers to be exactly the same numbers that I just wrote down from what a 224C actually is. And that L channel is a value of 65, so I'm going to grab this all the way up till it gets to be a 65. And I'm going to go to my A channel and click on this, and the A channel was supposed to be 56, mine is 55, so I'm going to bump it up one hair. And then the minus 16 is exactly the same. This is a 224C in Pantone. Collapse the image. Retype the name, 224C. That's what its color is. Command J to duplicate that image. Oh, I didn't keep the name, sorry. Open up the copy that you just made. Click on the solid color to open it up. We're going to do a teal-y shirt now, so click down in the greens. I'm going to do 7723C. So open up your library, type in, again, you want to click on the Pantone solid color group. Type in 7723 really quickly. Did it get you to a greenish color? So here, exactly what I did before. Double click on the solid color. It'll bring you right back into the Pantone part. You can go back to the color picker if you want, or click on the color libraries. And again, Pantone solid color. Good. And then type in 7723. And it'll take you right to that greenish color. And again, I'm going to write down the numbers, the LAB numbers. It's a 62, a minus 34, and a 8. And say OK. It'll actually give you that color. I'm going to put a curve on top of it. There is a curve already on top of this. I need to reset this curve that was controlling that to its default. So simply click on that drop-down menu at the top and go to default. It just clears everything out. Go to the lightness channel, click on the targeting adjustment tool, hover right over the number 1, and we are looking for an L value of 62. I had a 38 on there, so I'm dragging it up to a 62. I've got a minus 34. That's actually was what the A was, so we don't need any change there. The B is a positive 8, not a 7. The colors are always close to this. It's usually just the lightness. Sorry. Come on. Close up the group and type in 7723C. How long a day can you do this? So why does this matter? Did that work for you, Jack?
Yeah,
Shoot. Oh, absolutely. So companies will actually do, so like if you're shooting for, anybody, shirt guy, whoever, whatever, even Uniqlo will actually have it. And they'll actually put a spectrometer on the shirt and they'll know exactly what color it is in real life, what color the dye is, and they'll specify that in a Pantone color to all the art directors who then pass it down to people like retouchers and anybody else. Oh, cars especially. Anything in advertising, you will get Pantone colors. Kodak's red, not Kodak, Coca-Cola's red is trademarked. It's an incredibly specific color, and people will be searching, they'll be testing it all the way along. So yes, your cars have a very specific one color. Yeah, and that's what they expect. So I always say this, so everybody's looking a little bit tired right now, so I'm going to give you a great little tip. So client comes to you and says, I've got 100 shirts. It's all the same style shirt, but it's 100 different colors. What'll it take for you to shoot it? And I say to them, okay, well, I need to figure out what I can really shoot in a day, what a stylist can really prep in a day, because that's really going to be the bigger issue here. Once you get the lighting set up, it's really just, it's folding the shirt, styling the shirt, pinning the shirt. People use pinup boards, getting the shirt put into place. Again, your lighting should be somewhat consistent, focusing and shoot. The photography part is relatively easy, right? So I'm going to go easy on them, $2,500 a day. It's an old day rate for me, but fine. It looks like it's going to be a relatively good job, big job, and I want this job, right? So how long is it going to take the stylist to actually prep and do this? Well, they first have to steam the shirt out. Then they put in a folding board. They have to fold it around the folding board and secure it. Then they need to slide the board out of it, get it onto a pin board, and then get it mounted up in front of your camera. Minimum a half hour, working with a stylist assistant. So how many can you do in a day? 8-hour day, I can do 16. I'm going to be kind to you, though. I'm going to squeeze in somehow. I'm going to manage to do 20 in a day. That's 5 days of shooting. So me at $2,500 a day, 5 days of shooting, $2,500 a day is $10,000. No, it's $12,500. The stylist is $800 a day times 5 days is another $4,000. The stylist assistant is $300 a day times 5 days. It's another $1,500. So now I'm knocking on the door of $18,000, $20,000. I need a studio for 5 days. That's $1,200 a day for the studio. There's an assistant, $300 a day. There's a digital tech, $500 a day, all for 5 days. I'm up knocking on the door of $40,000, $50,000 to do this job. And they say, okay, fine. And I say, great. And I go in, I get the studio. I'm going to be generous. I'm going to hire the crew for half a day, but the studio for the full day. I get the one shot done. And then I go in Photoshop, and I redo the other 99 shots. It'll take me 2-3 hours. In 1 day of shooting plus 3 hours of retouching, I can make 50 grand. Are you fucking kidding me?
No way, they would believe that?
Oh, absolutely.
God. No?
What?
Like, wouldn't they notice that, like, the
Oh.
shirt's not changing form or anything?
No, you sell them on the fact that you got them all exactly the same because that's what they're looking for. Oh, guys, I got to tell you right now, this business, it's all photography. I've always said this. I do believe this is true. Photography is a lie. The advantage of it is that everybody believes it's the truth. But it's all a lie. Everything that I do as a fashion photographer is a lie. Those clothes are horrible, and I make them look great. They're just, I mean, I do. It's the old, you know, the silk cowsy or silk pigsy or whatever. But I do. I make really, really, really shitty, ugly clothes look really good. It's a lie. That's what this is all about. But if somebody is getting what they're asking for and you don't go over, I actually might even go in $2,000, $3,000 under just to endear myself to them and say, you know, I was able to shave a couple $1,000s off for you. Here you go. I'm not greedy too much. Does this make sense? What we're looking at here, going here, you can do this in your sleep. Well, not really in your sleep, but you see how easy this part is. Are we good on this? All right. I got one last thing to show you. We're going to go in the opposite direction because it's a bit different in the formula. We've got 10 minutes. It won't take us that long. You can close this guy up. But I don't want you to think that this is about fashion only. This is how you change the color of cars. This is how you change the color of brick, of houses, of lawns, of skies. This is how you actually do it, especially if you need to do something radical. If I've got a blue sky and I need to make it blood red, this is how you do it. You don't go in, hue saturation won't get you anywhere. Right? So this, I mean, really opens that door. Okay, so last thing really quickly, and then we're done. It's the Shirt Light version 2. If you can open that guy up. It starts out somewhat the same. It's a slightly different formula, but nonetheless, we're going to go through this part really quick. Okay, first move is the same thing we did before. You've got to change this to LAB mode. So up to the image menu, down to mode, down to LAB. Again, that's never called lab, not any more than RGB is called RGB. It's LAB. If you say, oh yeah, turn it into lab, whatever, people will know you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, if we take a look at the things that we've got going on here, I've actually separated stuff out. I've got the buttons, I've got the labels, and then I've got the shirt. I need those all three put together. The buttons and the labels actually need to be, I don't want to change their color and all of this. So when I add them to the shirt, I actually need them to be black to withhold this. How do I do that? Say what? Do what? No. Everybody's tired. I'm just going to tell you. Hover over the buttons icon. Don't select it. Just hover over the icon. Hold down the command key and click. It loads it as a selection. Come down to the shirt now, and you do need to select the shirt. And you'll see you've got the little buttons selection going, and you need to fill it with black. Option delete if black is your foreground color. Command D to deselect. We're going to do the same thing with the labels. Don't select the labels. Just hover over the icon. Hold down the command key. Click. Loads it as a selection. We're still working on the shirt layer. Again, black is still my foreground color. Option delete, command D to deselect. I've now got the proper mask to use to change only the fabric and keep the background, the labels, and the buttons unchanged. So over to my background here, I'm going to select the LAB composite channel at the very top. Over to my background, we are going to do a new group here. So I'm just going to click on to add new group, and we are going to make a similar color that we just made before. We are going to do a 224C, so that's what I'm going to call it. And then we're going to duplicate the background once, Command J to duplicate it. I'm going to drag it up into the 224C group. Then we're going to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to desaturate this image, so up to the image menu, down to adjustments, down to desaturate. Again, you do not want to start with color if you are recoloring. It just makes things much more complicated to do it because you're fighting the color that already exists. I'm going to double click on that and call it desat 1. And look back at my recipe really quickly. We are now going to add a solid color adjustment layer above this. There's only one right now. We might use another one. In this case, we probably won't, but we might. Solid color. And again, I'm going to go to my color libraries. I'm going to go to that Pantone solid coded group. I'm going to type in, what did I say we're doing? 224C, so 224. It actually gives me the color. I've already got the LAB values that are written down, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. We need to now set the blend mode of this layer from normal down to multiply. Again, I don't have my layer or the mask on this group, so I'm going to go over to my channel that's got the shirt mask in it, the total one. Hover over the icon, hold down the command key and click to load it as a selection. Go back to the group, the top of it, that's the little icon of the folder, and click Add Layer Mask to this, so it actually creates the layer mask for it. I'm going to then finally add a color sampler dot right into the middle to make sure that my LAB values are correct. Again, I'm going to select the color value, or actually I'm going to select the image to get a genuine readout of my LAB values right here. And the LAB values are actually, they're close, but they're not quite right. So I'm going to click on the solid color layer. I'm going to add just a regular curve on top of that. In the regular curve on the top, I'm going to start with the lightness layer. I'm going to grab the targeting adjustment tool and come down and click on this. It's reading 62. The actual value in Pantone is 65, so I'm going to click and just drag it up a little bit to get to 65. The color is a positive 55, so we're close but not quite there. I'm going to go to the A channel, still using the targeting adjustment tool, bump that up 1 to a 56. And then the B channel is actually a minus 16, not a minus 15, so I'm going to click on that same spot and pull down 1 till I get 16. and you are off to the races. Now, if you felt like this thing lacked contrast, it needed more contrast, there's no reason that you can't duplicate DSAT1, Command J, drag it all the way on top of this madness, and change its blending mode to overlay. Same trick that we used before, but radically drop your opacity on the sky. So you can see it's building definitely, it's changing the color, it's building in contrast. But at this stage of the game, I need to go back to my curve. It'll be close, the color will be close. It's really just basically a lab thing. I'm going to tear off the LAB, the L value of this, go to my targeting adjustment tool, back to that little point. And again, it's reading now, where is my, oh, there's another point that's sitting right up here at the top. I'm not going to pay attention to that one. I'm still going after this number 1 point. I'm going to click on that and pull that up till it reads a 65. The 55 and the minus 16, well, it was actually a 56. So back to the A version and pull it back down a little bit. So again, you can go through these guys to bump the contrast. I mean, that's basically what this is doing. It's bumping the contrast here, but still keep the same color. Are we good on this part? Okay, last thing, homework. So, part of your homework is to do what you didn't do last week, this 9.2, shoot and composite the man-made background, again, using one of those 2 figures that I gave you. And then what's also due for next week is this, assignment 10-0. This is your last assignment for this class. Everything from this point on, we're just going to be working on stuff, but I expect you to be working on your final project. Okay, we're still going to be learning new things in this class. We're still going to be doing other things in this class, but this will be the last graded assignment that you have, yes, until your final. I'm sorry, what?
What's man-made? Like,
oh, so man-made is exactly what we just did earlier today, where we took those different pictures, put them together to create a background, an artificial background, not a real space. Anyway, it's to smooth this swimsuit out. If you take a look at your assignment in week 10, a couple of clues I'm going to throw out to you right now. There's more than one file in here. But the file that it calls to actually fix is this file right here, this 059. So you're supposed to take this thing right here and make it look like that thing. You're removing all of the wrinkles of the swimsuit. You just read the instruction. You're removing all the wrinkles, you're removing the jewels, you're getting rid of all of this. You're smoothing all of this out. That's the assignment. Are we good on this? I'll see you guys next week. Did everybody get on the sign-in sheet?
I'm assuming it's gonna be more than just the mixer brush.
We'll see. I can give you another clue. I'll give you another clue. Other things that we did today are involved, should be involved.